Hello, I'm Leah Martin with NASA Communications. It is a beautiful day here at Kennedy Space Center as we celebrate Earth Day. Today's event gives students both here in person and across the nation an opportunity to find out how technology and science coexist with nature here at our center. Here today to talk to us about Kennedy's stewardship of land and resources, our partnerships with other federal agencies, and exciting NASA initiatives. I'm joined by Don Dankert, environmental biologist here at Kennedy Space Center. Jeff Collins, environmental protection specialist here at Kennedy Space Center. Stan Howarder, wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And Kelly McCarthy, Education Program Specialist at NASA's Stennis Space Center. Thank you all so much for being here today. We're excited to hear about the insight that you have to share with our students. And Don, without further ado, we'll start with you.
Awesome, thank you. Well, hey, welcome y'all. It's exciting to be here with you guys and talk to you a little bit about what we do here at KSC. As Leah said, my name's Don Dankert. I work in the environmental management branch here at KSC for NASA, and I'm the lead for our environmental planning group. Overall, within our branch, we do a lot more than just natural resources, although Jeff and Stan, we're a little more natural resource specific in what we do, but also within our groups, we have an energy and water group. We have a sustainability group. We also, cultural, historic resources is also something that we're very involved with. And our sister branch works specifically with environmental permitting, things like contamination, remediation, air quality. And so we have a very large staff of subject matter experts that really cover all, I guess it's everything environmental to say, right? From air and water to what we're more concerned with and specialize in with the management of the natural resources here on center. I think you got an opportunity with Mr. Brooks this morning to spend some time out on the beach on our dune project, which is near and dear to my heart. I've worked on that project, I think since I started. I've been working on that project now for about 12 or 13 years out on our beach. Coastal sustainability, obviously. You saw that firsthand and probably talked a lot about it out there as a big deal here at KSC. We're bordered on the east side by the Atlantic Ocean, and then the interior portions by the lagoon and the river as well. So we're kind of an island. So coastal erosion, those type of things are very important to us. And I think you had an opportunity to kind of see some of the hands-on work we do with our long-term monitoring, how we go out and do surveys, some of the technology that we employ when we're things like doing animal sampling and those type of things. So I unfortunately don't get to do much of that on the ground fun work anymore. I spend most of my time behind a desk, but our counterparts that were out there with you this morning demonstrating some of that. We have an amazing staff of ecologists, biologists, geologists that they're really kind of the heartbeat of what we do. They're the ones that are out there every day, continuing monitoring to ensure, as Leah pointed out, we're not just the world's preeminent launch center. We're also on a national wildlife refuge. This is as you've driven around and taken a look at this place, it's a very, very unique place, not just within Florida, but certainly within the country. So one of the big things that we do, and we've been doing now for, I believe, 60 years. We celebrated 60 years with the refuge. The refuge was established just a little over 60 years ago, but kind of finding that balance in how we exist here as a operational launch complex, not just with NASA missions, but the commercial missions, and then balance that with managing a amazing National Wildlife Refuge. And Stan will talk a little bit more about their mission, but primarily the biggest part of that is some of what you saw this morning, the continual long-term monitoring of what our actions here have on the natural environment, and this long-term partnership we've had with the refuge. We work, my group specifically works very, very closely with the refuge, almost on a daily basis. So anything that we're doing, we're conferring with our refuge counterparts so that, we're always looking big picture. We always want to understand we're going to grow the spaceport, we're going to continue space exploration, but NASA and KSC Shirley, we take our responsibility for environmental stewardship very seriously. It's a tenet and a cornerstone of what we do here. So I'm fortunate enough to be able to work in this amazing place and help be a part of that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff.
Very good. Hey, welcome everybody. I know some of you have come from a pretty far distance, so welcome to Kennedy Space Center, and hopefully you saw today what a special place this is. We've got somewhere on the order of 56 state and federally listed species, and it's the most listed species, it's the most federally listed species on a federal property in the continental U.S. So pretty special place, and we've got, a lot of launch activity going on. We've got build out of the spaceport, and we're at about, out of a 141,000 acre property, we're at about 5,000 acres of development, and it will build out to 7,500 acres. So, that sounds like a lot, but at the end of the day, there's still 133 or so thousand acres in conservation. And really that's kind of what I want to talk about, because NASA's conservation efforts here at Kennedy Space Center and things we do for the Indian River Lagoon. You've probably heard of the Indian River Lagoon. It's made the national news. We've had algal blooms. We've lost seagrass. There's impact to aquatic species and manatees. And it's relevant for you because no matter where you are, everywhere is experiencing algal blooms of some kind, whether it's freshwater or estuarine or saltwater. Blue-green algal blooms are pretty common now. They're the norm, I think. And so this KSC environment is a pretty sensitive environment on a barrier island surrounded by the Indian River Lagoon with all these species. And how do you develop on a center, without having impacts? Because there will be impacts as you build out 2,500 acres or so. And so one thing we have to do is, it's a $2 word, we mitigate for wetland and species impacts to compensate. It's just another word for compensate for those impacts. So if you impact a wetland, these are state and federal laws. If you impact a wetland, you've got to go create or improve a wetland somewhere else. And if you impact scrub jay habitat or gopher tortoises, you need to go improve habitat for those species as well. And so there's plenty of things to be done on the larger Kennedy Space Center. But probably the biggest move towards habitat conservation really was the establishment of the refuge, Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, back in the 60s. It was really kind of an idea ahead of its time. Maybe not as forward-leaning as going to the moon, but pretty optimistic and ambitious. And it's really saved the community here, the ecological communities on the barrier island, because if you've driven around the surrounding area, you've seen how much development there is. A lot of it was prior to having to do any kind of water quality treatment for development or anything. And so we've, just the fact that Kennedy Space Center is here is conserving that habitat, and that provides benefits to the lagoon as well, because you have these natural water quality treatment processes going on. Some other things that have happened over the years, monitoring, started back in 1983, ecological monitoring with the space shuttle. You've probably heard of the space shuttle, right? So we started monitoring seagrass and water quality and turtles and launch impacts, and that continued throughout shuttle, and we actually continue a lot of that today, still monitoring the Indian River Lagoon. That's some important work, given that the lagoon has fallen on hard times. And we also have some stormwater and nutrient studies going on, so those are important for protecting the lagoon. We've got shoreline protection projects Don is responsible for the dune project. I think you saw that in your tour today, 3.5 miles of dune. That's the guy right there that made all that happen. But what you probably don't know is we've got about 170 miles of shoreline in the Indian River Lagoon. And so one of the things that's happened with climate change, sea level rise, the water's come up about 1/2 foot in the last 20 years. And that doesn't sound like much, but it's had huge impacts because we get shoreline erosion. Anytime we have an east wind and high water conditions, you don't even need a hurricane. We've got shoreline erosion, and that ends up with vegetation in the lagoon. It's ground up. It contributes to water quality problems. We have these old pine flatwood soils, and they're very mineralized. They have a lot of color. There's also areas with muck and nutrients, and all that's going into the lagoon. And so all this is one of the impacts that we have to the lagoon. So we're trying to protect that shoreline without what we call hardening or armoring the shoreline. You've probably seen seawalls and solid rock revetments along the shoreline. Those may be good for shoreline protection, but they're terrible for aquatic species and birds, that use those shoreline habitats. So we're trying to do something a little softer with our Living Shoreline project that is nearly completed now. And we've actually got horseshoe crabs and birds out there right now using that habitat, even though it's not completed. So that'll be a nice feature. I'll tell you some fun factoids, I guess, from some of our monitoring. We've got acoustic receivers in the Indian River Lagoon, actually in the ocean too. And so we catch fish and we tag them, put a little acoustic tag in them, and they swim around and it pings and you can track species. And so there's a group called Socorro and I think Florida Atlantic Coast Telemetry Network. And so we're part of that, and we share data with these people. And so we've been able to do much larger studies in terms of the migration and movements of species and how to protect those species. You don't want to be out doing potentially a beach renourishment if you've got some sensitive species out there at the time that you want to do it. So that's really helped inform what's going on with aquatic species. We actually had a black drum that we monitored, and it went to New Jersey twice. Anyone from Ohio? One person from Ohio. Anybody else from the Northeast? 2 people from Ohio. Well, that's a long ways. So you think about swimming to New Jersey and coming back and doing it twice. That's one really fit fish, right? We also found out we have a bull shark pupping or nursery area here in the Turning Basin, and most people don't know that. There's bull sharks in there, so hopefully y'all did not get ankle deep in the water doing anything today, seining fish out in the Turning Basin. So we see a lot of interesting things from that. We share data with other federal agencies, resource agencies, with state agencies too, especially seagrass data. We are starting to see some seagrass make a comeback, and we just completed a planting project, a seagrass restoration project, where we planted seagrass out in the Indian River Lagoon. So lots of things happening there. We make a strong effort and supported by NASA to take care of our resources here, and so I'll look forward to any questions on that. So, Stan?
Hi, I'm Stan Howater. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Wildlife Refuge System. So when NASA established the Space Center here, they purchased about 140,000 acres in order to create a buffer area for the rocket operations. So at that time, this was some of the most pristine areas in Florida, and the ability to launch rockets without having homes and people in the way created an opportunity for the Fish and Wildlife Service to manage this natural area. So that NASA asked the Fish and Wildlife Service to help them manage this buffer area, and the buffer area became Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. So the overall NASA property is what we call an overlay refuge, where NASA owns the land, but the Fish and Wildlife Service manages the natural resources on that property. So we manage a variety of different habitats here that are fairly unique in Florida because of some of the last undisturbed areas. Between the NASA property and the Space Force Center, there's 42 miles of undisturbed beach, which is very important for nesting sea turtles, for the southeastern beach mice, which the Space Center and the spaceport to the south is pretty much the entire population of southeastern beach mice. And then in addition to that, we have some of the best coastal scrub habitat, which is incredibly important for species like the Florida scrub jay. Florida scrub jay is endemic to Florida, and there's very few populations left, and this is the #2 population left for Florida scrub jays. In addition to that, we manage some of the largest remaining tracts of coastal wetlands left on the east coast of Florida. And this is very important to migratory water birds, such as waterfowl, and wading birds and shorebirds. That's it.
Thanks, Dan. So my name's Kelly. I work with our Office of STEM Engagement on our Next Gen STEM project. And I'm really excited to talk with you all about an initiative that it's based in a partnership we have with the USDA Forest Service. And it was motivated by the recognition that we need to focus on things like environmental stewardship, ecological preservation, green infrastructure, all the things that we heard about from the team here that is happening right at Kennedy, sort of helped us drive this project that we're working on that's tied to the Artemis program. So we have a couple charts we can pop up on the screen, but I want to start by saying that the Next Gen STEM project is focused on working with students like yourselves and educators to prepare the future STEM workforce across all fields. And we really want to make sure that we're elevating your voices, and we're really excited that you're here and going to be making your voice heard through the product that you develop. So thank you for being here and making time throughout the course of the day. You can go ahead to the next chart. I want to start with a little bit of history. So a little over a half century ago, astronaut Stuart Roosa was getting ready for a moonbound mission with Apollo 14. Before Roosa became an astronaut, he was a part of the U.S. Forest Service, serving as a smoke jumper, and had really tight connections to sustainability and conservation efforts, as well as land management. Roosa had the opportunity to take a special payload to his trip to lunar orbit, and working with the Forest Service at that time was able to carry a pouch of 5 different tree species in seed form to travel with him and spend 3 days in lunar orbit. When the seeds were returned to Earth, they were germinated by the Forest Service and sent out to dignitaries across the U.S. as part of our bicentennial celebration in the 70s. And some of them made their way to NASA centers. So I think maybe some people got a chance to visit the Moon Tree Garden that's located right here at Kennedy. If you visit any other NASA centers or some universities, you may find some of the moon trees of the Apollo era standing tall today, 50 years later. As we were getting ready to launch Artemis 1, the Next Gen STEM project, which is part of our Office of STEM Engagement, worked with the USDA Forest Service to think about what we could do to honor the legacy of that project, and really think about how we could emphasize the importance of global stewardship and conservation efforts. And this is the beginning of some opportunities that we hope that you and your teachers will stay involved in with us. So if you go ahead to the next slide over, That was your little stop at Kennedy. One more. I'm going to talk about where we are today. Fast forwarded 50 years. On Artemis 1, we again worked with the Forest Service to send 5 species of tree seeds to on a journey toward the moon aboard the Orion capsule. The seeds traveled further than any spacecraft made for humans has ever traveled before, launching last November. The seeds that were selected include Douglas fir, loblolly pine, sweet gum, sycamore, and giant sequoia. The reason that they were selected by the Forest Service is because collectively they cover a broad geographic area of the lower 48 states. They almost exactly mirror the tree seeds that were taken on Roos's flight, with the exception of one. The Forest Service decided to go with the giant sequoia versus coast redwood, which was taken up on Roos's flight because it had more versatility in the replanting sites that it can be located in. The Forest Service is planning to do genetic testing on the seeds that have returned. And something that's really exciting is that they included a couple of different sources of seeds so that we can make sure that there's opportunities for long-term genetic adaptability in the outplanting sites that are selected. While the Forest Service will be conducting a genetic study on the trees as they grow, a critical part of the initiative was embedding education programming with connections to STEM, global stewardship, Earth action, with themes that include data literacy, citizen science, conservation education, earth science connections, and sustainability. I want to share a little bit about what's happening now with this initiative. And if you go ahead to the next chart, we can talk a little bit about the exciting news that happened last December. So on December 11th, the Orion capsule that carried this new generation of moon tree seeds splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, made its way back right here to Kennedy Space Center. The seeds were decommissioned as a payload, and in February of this year, just a few months ago, we had a chance to test nearly 2,000 tree seeds of those 5 different species for viability. And found out that we were ready to send them out to sites to start the growing process. So their journey took them on a lunar-bound mission back to the Pacific Ocean, back here to Kennedy, and then to a nursery in Bend, Oregon, that our partners at the Forest Service run, where they went through that testing. And since then, just a few weeks ago, they've been shipped out to nurseries across the U.S. where they're starting to germinate into seedlings. We're expecting to announce information about a really cool opportunity for education organizations, schools, informal community organizations to potentially be the host of a moon tree seedling at their site, with the expectation that we'll be able to work together, your organizations and NASA's Office of STEM Engagement, to build out some really cool education and research and science initiatives. We have a lot of resources available through the Forest Service to help identify comparative studies and ways that we can collectively exchange information that we learn about the trees. And we're really excited to hear from you all about how you might be interested in engaging with that project. The information will be released through NASA STEM social channels and our newsletters, and we'll make sure that you have access to those links and resources when they're ready. In the meantime, we are continuing to work with the USDA Forest Service on a number of education resources, including collector's cards, trading cards, citizen science activities, and a distance learning series. There's an event called Moon Trees Live to hear more detail about the journey of the tree seeds and some of the research that's coming up from the Forest Service research team on April 28th, so we're really excited about that. And we've got a toolkit available that has a lot of information about the history of this project, ways to get involved in our connected activities with the GLOBE program, and we'll be launching a really cool summer initiative where you might have a chance to follow the Apollo trees and collect data on those existing trees 50 years after they were disseminated. You can also learn through those resources why we care about some of the data that is tracked on the Apollo trees and the upcoming Artemis 1 seedlings, and ask questions We've got a couple of early elementary resources coming out about the project, and again, that proposal opportunity, which we're really excited about. Again, this is really driven by the fact that we want to make sure we are emphasizing the importance of global stewardship and conservation education. So I'm really excited that we got to talk to you a little bit about that. If you go to that last slide, the next one over, that provides some links that our resources are available at. Great. Thank you.
Kelly. We'll have that slide available at the end of
Oh,
this
perfect.
broadcast for any educators who are interested in checking into it. And the moon trees here at Kennedy have always kind of captivated me, so I'm really excited to see where all of those trees from the Orion project to end up. So I'll definitely be tuning in to find out where they go. So in just a moment, we'll have an opportunity to hear from the students in the room and to ask questions to our panel. But before we do that, I'd like to go over to the bullpen at the Kennedy Space Center, where we have some students who were joining us, joining and virtually attending our briefing today, and also having the opportunity to ask questions to our panelists. So thank you so much, students, for joining us here today. So again, I'd like to thank our panelists for all the information that you've shared. It's so interesting to hear about what's happening here at our center. And students, now that you have had the opportunity to hear from our panelists, you also have the chance to ask some questions. So if you're here in the room with us and you'd like to address our panelists, feel free to raise your hand and give us your name and grade, and we'd love to hear from you. Do we have any questions in the room?
I'm Will, and I'm in 8th grade. My question is, in your research, what is one thing that is important to share or teach to our future generation that would help preserve our environment for a longer period of time?
Don?
Sure. Wow, I could probably spend an hour talking about that with you guys for sure. That is a great question. I think the way I would approach that is maybe kind of the way that myself and Jeff and Stan talked about here. To when you think about environmental stewardship, sustainability, ecological health, those kind of things, maybe think much bigger picture than right here where I'm at right now, in my backyard. But, think more globally, right? Here at the Kennedy Space Center, I mean, it's, we think, not just about what we're doing here, but regionally, as Jeff talked about the lagoon, we're one small portion of that, but we, think about the work that we do and the studies that we do are much, they're applicable outside of our geographic region to our north and south, so thinking big picture, what are the impacts of what we're doing here, or, what are the potential impacts of what I'm doing that are not just going to affect me right here, right now, but, my community, everything around me, think big.
Any other questions in the room? Right here?
Hi, I'm Elliot. I'm in 12th grade, and you just talked about like globally, and like this is like a bigger issue than just like here. So, does Kennedy Space Center collaborate with the other sites, NASA sites in the country, or with like other sites in other countries, like in their space programs, to, I guess, research sustainability and environmental impacts of space travel?
I think I can probably answer part of that question from, a biologist perspective. I can tell you certainly environmental sustainability and stewardship is not just a tenet that, we hold dear here at Kennedy Space Center. It is agency-wide. And, certainly when you think about the work that NASA does agency-wide with climate adaptation and that type of work, yeah, I mean, that's literally a global resource, right? And, working with some of these other agencies like the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, launching their satellites that they use, for the same thing, looking at sea level rise, looking at, global climate change, those type of things. So I would say that NASA certainly is a leader in overall global environmental sustainability for sure, absolutely.
Wanted to add to just from the education perspective, the fact that we work as an agency and with other federal agencies like the Forest Service on education initiatives that are prioritizing sustainability and global stewardship. I think that in itself is an indicator that the need for this is recognized beyond just a single one of our centers. We definitely have a lot of collaboration across the agency. And you see that even if we're not on a part of the technical or direct mission work.
We're one center of many. We're one agency made up of several different different centers, so we collaborate across the agency for certain. Are there any more questions in the room? Right here.
Hi, my name is Madison, and is NASA planning to ever extend their environmental actions, like across Florida, more?
Let me make sure I understand the questions. I missed some of that. Is NASA planning to, I missed it.
Extend like their acres more, like get more acres to
Oh.
make more reserves or anything?
Well, as far as I know right now, and by the way, I didn't mention this before, but we have a whole center planning group of, really smart people. That doesn't include Don and I. We're not planners, but as we build out the center, they look at environmental constraints and whether it's sea level rise or listed species, or a little thing we call QD arcs. If you have something that might catch on fire or explode, you need a certain buffer around that, right? So you don't want to be packing in development there. And so we do a really good job of that. And through that planning effort, I haven't heard of anything NASA expanding throughout Florida. Have you heard anything on that?
I don't necessarily think the Kennedy Space Center is going to get any bigger, but I mean, I would say this, a lot of the work that our group focuses on from, environmental conservation studies, those kind of things, the work that we collaborate with on the refuge, on species and natural resource management, is utilized by many people, not just across the state of Florida, but across the nation. So the work that we're doing here, the studies that we do, the papers that we publish, those type of things are broadly applicable to natural resource management in many other areas, across the entire country for sure.
And I'd like to add that one of the issues that we face as a population is, we're not making any more land, so we have to manage the land that we have as best as we can. And with Florida's growing like crazy, people are moving here all the time because this is paradise on earth here. So one of our goals, both as for NASA and the Fish and Wildlife Service, is to manage the habitat that we have as best as possible. So we do prescribed burns, we manage exotic species, we control exotic plants. We try to take the little piece of land that we have here on the Kennedy Space Center and make it as good for wildlife and people and the environment as humanly possible. And that's what we strive for every day. And that's why NASA partners with Fish and Wildlife Service to manage the buffer area for wildlife and conservation.
But to that point of expansion, the refuge and Canaveral National Seashore both have added on their own property, right, to the KSC property. You've got your own land holdings.
Yeah, there's not a lot left to purchase and to acquire, but I think the point is that we manage everything that's out there as best as we can.
Steward what we have well. Very well said. We did have a submission sent in from a student. Ben from Atlanta has a question that he'd like to address to the panelists. Ben?
Hi, I'm Ben from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm a junior. And my question is, what is NASA doing to monitor methane emissions?
So we actually reached out, as we said, Kennedy Space Center is one center as part of our agency, and so we've reached out to our friends at Goddard Space Flight Center. Dr. Leslie Ott, meteorological studies researcher, actually responded and let us know that NASA's working hard to find ways to measure methane from the ground, air, and space. We've recently developed an instrument called EMIT, or the Earth Surface Mineral Dust Source Investigation, to measure mineral dust on the International Space Station, and scientists have shown that under certain conditions, EMIT can detect very large concentrations of methane produced by some types of human activities, like oil and natural gas production. These new data complement airborne missions, where scientists are using innovative approaches to measure emissions of carbon dioxide and methane over all oil and gas facilities, landfills, agriculture, and vulnerable wetland ecosystems. And scientists then use that data to improve estimates of natural greenhouse gas emissions that may change in a warming world. We also coordinate with scientists around the world to maintain ground-based networks, which is networks that we have here, to ensure that satellite data are consistent and high quality, and all of these data feed into complex models that help us track methane emissions and how they are changing and impacting our planet now and for decades to come. So thank you so much to Leslie for sharing that with us, and thank you to Ben for that question. We did have a question come in from our friends who are in the bullpen right now. We have a question from Alejandra Burgos, who's in sixth grade, and she wanted to know, how do rocket launches affect wildlife here on Kennedy Space Center, since we have such a steady cadence?
It's another great question. I think, largely, obviously, that's something we've looked at for a long time, monitoring our launch events, understanding, specifically, through the shuttle era. As I think Jeff pointed out, our ecological monitoring staff and our program is probably approaching about 35 years of consistent, continued environmental monitoring. But specific to launches, I think what we really find is that animals, critters, they have something called a startle response, right? So much like, us, a big loud noise, you shake, you run. Animals tend to do the same thing. So in and of itself, launch complexes are big, noisy, industrial type places. But, on the outskirts of that, what we see and observe is that, when those engines fire up and there's that loud noise, it triggers that startle response. Birds fly away, beach mice, gopher tortoises crawl back into their burrows, alligators submerge, that type of thing. So we haven't really had any specific impacts to the wildlife specific to launch activity, because most things take off when they hear the loud noise.
And a couple other things on that, we also monitor wading birds, for example. So we want to make sure there's no rookeries that come in next to one of our launch pads, because that's bad for birds and bad for rockets too. Bad for people if there's a human launch. So we do that, and then Stan may be one of the lucky ones that gets to go out when NASA has a launch. We have some catchment basins out there to catch the deluge water from the rocket launch. And so before that launch, they go out, and if there's any turtles or alligators or anything in there, they get to capture all those critters and move them out of harm's way.
Those animals get a free vacation for a little bit, huh? Cost-free relocation. Okay, do we have any more questions here in the room, right here in the back?
My name is Gloria Edith. I'm in 9th grade. And going back to the topic about dunes, why are the dunes here in Kennedy Space Center important to the wildlife that lives there?
Excellent question. Why are the dunes here at Kennedy Space Center important to the wildlife who live here?
Oh, sure. So our dunes, when you were standing out there in the dunes, there are a lot of plants on those dunes, and I think Stan talked a little bit about the area our coastal strand area. There are quite a few threatened and endangered species that occupy those. The southeastern beach mouse, those dunes are very important to them. Gopher tortoises, indigo snakes, and a whole host of other species. So to say nothing of the, 3,000 to 5,000 sea turtles we have nest on our beach every year. So when we considered and started building those secondary dunes that we call them, their primary purpose is to protect our infrastructure from flooding and storm events, but also being cognizant of that is very valuable habitat. So working with the refuge and others, came up with a plan to where all the plants that you saw on that dune, every single one of them, they're all native. Our planting contractors, even to the point of some of the grasses that grow out there, aren't commercially available at your local nurseries. They came out, took clippings, seeds, grew the plants, much like our Moon Tree project. They grew those plants directly from the source to bring them back. So the goal to create that natural habitat, and then our long-term continued monitoring of that. So I think you saw some of that today, where they're using the Sherman traps to catch beach mice. I don't know if they brought out the gopher tortoise cams to scope gopher tortoise burrows. So as we constructed that dune and then got the planting done, it became more mature. We're continually going out there and sampling for the success of the vegetation, and then all of the animals that occupy that area. And I'll add in a cheap plug. We've been very successful in that, in doing that. You know, as Stan said, you can't find this stretch of coastal, undeveloped coastal area anywhere in Florida. So obviously that was, very, very important. And then we're coming up on nesting season for sea turtles. Stan and his colleagues monitor the beaches every day for sea turtle nests. We mark, count, just to ensure that we're continuing that success and being sensitive to preserving that very unique habitat we have out there.
One other thing that's been a huge success about the dune creation is that it created a wall between the beach and the launch pads. One of the things that sea turtles are very sensitive to is artificial light. So when our baby sea turtles hatch out of the eggs, they emerge at nighttime, and they're looking for that shine on the ocean from the moon reflecting off the water. And it's very easy for sea turtles to get distracted by artificial lights and wander towards the light source rather than making their way to the ocean. And that dune, both in on a natural dune and then the artificial dune that was built on the Space Center, shields the light from the Space Center, so the sea turtles don't get disoriented by that. Because there are times, the Space Center is very good about turning the lights off when they can, but there are certain operations that the lights on the pads need to be left on so that they can do preparations for launches. But since the dune's been created, we have not had any disorientations of baby sea turtles going towards the pads in the areas where the dune is present.
Thank you so much. We did have another question that was submitted asking about some of the other initiatives in NASA that relate to Earth, climate change, and Earth-facing sciences. So Evie from Atlanta submitted a question for response. Evie?
Hi, I'm Evie. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm wondering, how does NASA monitor the ozone layer over Antarctica?
So again, we reached out to one of our subject matter experts, and Dr. King Ling, research scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, responded that NASA has been making satellite measurements of ozone through the globe, including Antarctica, since the 70s. Presently, direct measures of atmospheric ozone abundance are collected daily by AURA and Suomi NPP satellites. These remote-sensed ozone measurements are combined with ground-based measurements, and remote-sensed measurements of atmospheric variables such as temperature, and a state-of-the-art model simulation is created to analyze and understand the status of Antarctica ozone layer and its variability. So if you are interested in this or more information on the ozone layer, its history, or its current status, you can actually visit the NASA Ozone Watch website at www.ozonewatch.gsfc.nasa.gov. We do have another question submitted from our students who are joining us from the bullpen, and I think this one maybe Kelly will take down to you. We wanted to know, how do you continue to build awareness of environmental issues beyond the Earth Day celebration? I think you were talking about some of those initiatives earlier.
Sure. I think one of the ways we raise awareness is by partnering across different organizations who are doing that work. The research teams like those at Goddard are the subject matter experts that our Office of STEM Engagement work with closely when we're building out resources like the Moontrees Initiative. They help us to identify current mission priorities and current needs. Some of our focus areas for this year will be embedded into data literacy activities that the Education Office releases. I think overall awareness really comes down to regular, consistent communication and collaboration. And I think for you all, knowing that there is an open line of communication, as an agency, there's transparency and a lot of resources virtually to learn about the data that we're collecting with all of our Earth observation missions and how that's being used across the globe. And I think that's something that's really important. The information is at your fingertips. And I know there's some really cool things happening outside of Earth Day this summer related to how we learn about our planet through upcoming satellite missions. So to summarize that, I think knowing that you've got people, you've got resources, you've got facilities that are sharing information as we get it, and we want to make sure that there's that open line of awareness with the public, but also using your voices to amplify what you're seeing, and asking those questions is important too.
Love it. Do we have any other questions here in the room, right here?
Hi, my name is Iris. I am in 8th grade, and my question is, how do ecologists accurately count a species in order to put or remove them from the endangered or threatened species list?
Stan?
That's a big question. So, I mean, it really does depend on the individual species. They all have targets. Most of them revolve around sustainable populations. So, of course, that's different for a beach mouse versus an elephant. But you're looking for long-term viability of the species, which usually you want to have at least 3 independent populations, and that even if one of those populations blink out, then you have other populations. But it really does depend on the individual species. So, panthers, like the Florida panther, there's never going to be a huge number of panthers in the United States compared to beach mice, which intrinsically there'll always be larger populations in a viable population compared to a viable population of panthers. But it really is an individual species but it all comes down to population viability and what is the number of individuals that you need to ensure that they continue to exist on the landscape for an extended period of time.
Excellent. We do have a question from one of the students who's joining us from the bullpen, and Brady, who's an 8th grader, wants to know, what are ways that we can help turtles and keep them safe from pollution?
Well, I'm sure if light pollution, as Stan talked about, that's probably, certainly in my opinion, in coastal Florida, or any, coastal areas where you have sea turtles. Light pollution from adjoining communities or facilities is probably one of the biggest and most impactful things that you can do. Stan alluded to it. We work very hard here. We have a center-wide light management plan. We use what's called turtle-friendly or wildlife-friendly lighting, which is yellow lights, right? Not big, bright white lights. And as we approach turtle nesting season, we implement restrictions across the center on, how late you can have your lights on. For instance, right across the street at the VAB, that huge flag, normally that thing's lit up, 24 hours a day. During nesting season, we shut that off early. So we don't have that, even, this far away, that light can make it out there. For instance, this building that we walked in, you saw the beautiful mural that was painted on the side of it. The fellow that painted that, he liked to work in the evening, presumably because it wasn't, super hot out. So, we do simple things, put up barriers around where he was working, make sure his lights are pointing down, that kind of thing. But I would think light, light pollution is something that's easy. You can turn a light off, right? Something easy that everyone can do.
Yeah, locally around here, the Indian River Lagoon is a very important area for juvenile green sea turtles. So green sea turtles consume aquatic vegetation compared to some of the other. All the different species of sea turtle pretty much eat different things. Green turtles are the ones that are vegetarian, and they really depend on the seagrasses in the Indian River Lagoon. So water quality is probably the most important thing for those juvenile turtles, making sure that whether it's in the estuary or in the ocean, that we keep the water as clean as possible is essential for long-term survival of sea turtles.
And so in terms of things you can do, in addition to turtle-friendly lighting, there are a lot of different organizations that need volunteers to do work. I'm not going to name any of them, but there are opportunities to do things like that, and they have, summer programs for teenagers, and you can certainly get involved in that.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions here in the room? Oh, a couple of hands went up. Let's start over here.
Hi, my name is Austin, and going back to the topic of moon trees, do you guys plan to one day grow them on the surface of the moon?
So I think that's definitely a question for future research proposal opportunities, but I know that there are some student challenges and cool activities that are simulating growing vegetation in simulated lunar regolith. So I would encourage you to check out the Plant the Moon Challenge if you're interested in learning some of the research or activities that you can get involved in to look at what that would take. But yeah, and stay tuned on future opportunities with the Artemis program.
Those Artemis student challenges are so fun. I've had the opportunity to work with a couple of those, and it's always really neat to see all the creativity that kids come back with. So students take that opportunity and do it. It's really interesting. Do we have any other questions here in the room? Let's do up here.
Hi, I'm Kendall, and I'm a senior. I'd like to know, how are protocols for environmental protection at Kennedy Space Center determined?
So how do we develop our protocols? I think as Jeff pointed out, a lot of the protocols that we have, or the majority of them, are directed by either state or federal law. So we're continuing that along, if you will, right? We're bound by federal laws, so we develop like for our sea turtle monitoring program and our lighting program here in KSC. That's in direct relation to Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, and those are, so we develop along those lines. Some of the things like you saw this morning with our environmental monitoring, that's really just a great team of brilliant scientists who, we come to them and say, hey, here's what we want to look at, what should we be looking at, and then how do we do this? And they help us develop those long-term monitoring protocols. What should we be measuring? What animals should we be, trapping? Those type of things. But maybe Jeff or Stan can expand on that a little more.
Well, we have our own guidance document, or KNPR. We call it 8500.1. You can actually find it online, which is all things environmental at Kennedy Space Center, how we operate. It's beyond the things that Don and I and Stan deal with, what I call soft environmental, bugs and bunnies, that sort of thing, all the fun stuff. It gets into remediation and air quality and other aspects of environmental protection. So that kind of guides what we do, but definitely regulatory drives it as well, and there are state and federal requirements for different resources. But some of our requirements are actually more restrictive than the state or federal regulatory requirements. For example, every species at KSC is looked on as a protected species. It's not just the threatened and endangered ones. So I still remember 2 years ago, we had a contractor here, and they were out giving advice on a grackle. Grackles are very common. They're everywhere. They're in my tree right now at home. But we actually protected that nest from activities until the birds fledged, and then they could resume operations.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question, and so we are going to turn to Mohammed, who submitted a question from North Bergen, New Jersey.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Al-Shabini, and I'm from the North Bergen STEAM Academy. And my question is, how will climate change affect the future, and how will NASA plan to help?
So this is a topic that's very near and dear to all of us here at NASA. We reached out to Allison Liedner, who's a program manager for climate and resilience at NASA headquarters. And she let us know that climate change is already affecting us now and will continue to affect us in the future. Overall, the world will continue to get warmer, and some places will get more rain, whereas other places will become drier. The amazing array of NASA satellites lets us understand how fast the world is changing and what conditions are right now. And NASA satellites can also help us prepare for a resilient future. For example, understanding how much sea levels will rise in a specific location can help cities decide where they should put new buildings, and understanding drought conditions can let farmers know how to better utilize their water resources. So you can learn more information about climate change and climate change solutions that are being headed up by NASA by visiting climate.nasa.gov. So we invite all of you to visit that site. So we do want to let each of you know that this activity today has been undertaken on behalf of Next Gen STEM, and I'd like to throw up really quickly Kelly's resource sheet for more information on the Orion Moon Tree project coming up from Artemis 1 for tracking and following up on that. You can have more information that you can see up on your screen. And that is all the time that we have for today, but we'd like to take a moment to thank all of our panelists, our students who joined us here in the auditorium and over next door at the Kennedy Space Center press site, and then of course everybody who's joined us from across the country on NASA TV. This event is part of NASA's Next Gen STEM project, which reaches students where they are in classes and informal education programs at home, at Kennedy Space Center, on the beach, on TV, wherever each of you are today. So for more information on NASA's online community of practice for educators, as well as more NASA STEM content, like you saw today, information on upcoming events that we have, Artemis student challenges, and what NASA's doing in connection with Earth Day, please visit nasa.gov/STEM. And from all of us here at Kennedy Space Center, we would like to wish all of you Happy Earth Day.